Well, good afternoon. It's an honor to be here with you, and I want to start by thanking the organizers of this event. Let's give them a big hand for putting this on, and for all of you who came out here today. It is critical that we come out and we stand for liberty. We stand for our freedoms while we have that voice. You know, just a little bit as I was being introduced, they were sharing about my story, and you heard that I came from Iran. I was born in Iran. And so I witnessed in Iran, in my birth country, the people of Iran lose their freedoms. They were disarmed. They were put under tyranny and control. And today, 34 years later, it continues. So when we lose our freedoms, they are so difficult to gain back. And now is the time to stand. As was mentioned in the introduction, I'm an immigrant. I waited 16 years to legally become a U.S. citizen. I've also been a police officer. And so I've been on the side of enforcing the law, and I've been on that side where you see laws that are bad laws. And I-594 is one of the worst pieces of legislation I've ever seen in my life. While today I will share on some of the aspects of why I-94 is such an ill-written piece of legislation, I want to give a different spin today, a different perspective. You see, I'm also a pastor. I'm a Christian pastor, and I became a Christian 15 years ago. And I want to talk about not just the specific issues of this initiative, but I would like to talk about the moral issues of this initiative and the moral issues of what we're seeing happen in our nation. You see, in January of 2013, many of us stood in Olympia after President Obama had executive ordered 22 his what I call decrees against guns, against our right as citizens to keep and bear arms. In that rally, I said that tyranny was now at our doorstep. Tyranny was now in our faces, and tyranny was the future of our children if we don't act now. It grieves my heart to say since then that tyranny has become our reality, and it is increasing day by day by day. The worst kind of tyranny is when we think we are free, but really we are not. What is the real motivation behind I-594? Have any of you asked that of yourselves? What's really behind this? And who is behind I-594? That tells a lot, right? The billionaires like Mayor Bloomberg and Mr. Gates, the elected officials in our nation and our state who are proudly supporting this initiative. What is their goal? What is their agenda? What is behind the scenes? You see, I believe that I-594 is simply an offspring of the globalist agenda. The agenda of the United Nations. The agenda to remove and dismantle our sovereignty as a nation, our rights as citizens, and turn them over to a bunch of globalists that don't care about human life and human dignity. How many of you are familiar with the UN Arms Treaty? If you read the legislation of the UN Arms Treaty that, by the way, John Kerry signed in September of 2013, after the Senate had rejected it, he went to the UN and signed it anyway on behalf of our president. In that arms treaty, there are 7 outlined goals. Well, goals 1 through 5 have in essence been accomplished through all of the executive orders at the state and federal level. Do you know what goal number 6 is? Goal number 6 is gun registration and criminalization. And goal number 7 is gun confiscation. So they're 1 through 5, or they're there. So what is the goal of 594? The goal of 594 is to accomplish goal number 6, gun registration and criminalization. Because how are they going to confiscate our guns if you and I are not going to be willing to lay down our guns? They're going to do it through criminalizing us. And that's exactly what 594 is. In my opinion, if we allow ourselves to be disarmed through this registration and criminalization, tyranny is now unchecked. And tyranny will become our norm. We will become at a point where I witnessed in my birth country, where the people will just get to a place where they'll put their hands up in the air and say, well, what else can we do? Now is the time to stand. Now is the time to act. Now here's a question I want to ask you. Why on earth would our government and these folks who are behind this initiative would want to disarm us, especially at this time when we have the threat of ISIS in our nation and around the world? When we have over 100,000 gang members in America, violent gang members that are come across our porous borders and are across this nation, including Washington State. When we have the first beheading of a non-Muslim by the hand of a jihadist Muslim in Moore, Oklahoma, of all places. And if it was not for a citizen, a law-abiding citizen who had a weapon, there would have been 2 beheadings and maybe more. But the media isn't covering that, are they? By the way, where is the media? I saw King 5 here. I hope they cover this. I hope they cover the fact that we had a beheading in America. Como? I'm sorry. Doesn't matter. Whatever station they are. I hope that you guys are willing to tell the truth to the American people. It's time that the media starts telling the truth to the American people. If their agenda is to register, criminalize, and ultimately disarm, then they're doing a good job at it. Now here's the thing. While our nation is in this type of anarchy and chaos and lawlessness, the President of the United States hands out 90,000 pink slips to our military. And then he comes and says that we want to arm illegals in the military. Now, folks, first of all, that's against federal law. That's a felony. But secondly, that's treason. That is treasonous behavior. So here's what I want to be able to share with you today. You know, our ministry is called Truth and Love Project. The reason we call it that is because I believe we must speak the truth in love. Political correctness has no place in our lives now. It cannot have any place at all. We need to be encouraging law-abiding citizens to arm themselves in order to protect their families, their places of work, their communities, their state, and the nation. And we need to be telling our law-abiding citizens to arm themselves, to train, to know how and when to use weapons, to protect their families, their communities, their state and nation, especially when our lawmakers will not remove these individuals in our government who are now treasonous. You see, I am tired of hearing talk about impeachment. I believe it's time that we start talking about arrest warrants. Arrest warrants for these criminals that are in our government. Our society right now needs to be working together to protect our families, our communities, our state and nation, not going in the other direction. I-594 violates not only our Declaration, our Constitution, and our Bill of Rights, it violates the very laws of nature and of nature's God. The Declaration says that we are to live by the very laws of nature and nature's God. And the Declaration states that we are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Now notice how I said that word, unalienable, not inalienable. That word unalienable means that government has no authority to put a lien against rights which God Himself has given to us. That is consistent with the natural and moral law. We have a right to the First Amendment. We have a right of freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. But we have a right to the Second Amendment, which is a right to defend our lives, our families, our communities. The right to keep and bear arms. If you violate the Second Amendment, you violated the First Amendment. You violate both those amendments, there is no longer a United States of America. For a moment, I do want to talk about I-594. I know many of our speakers today will talk about the specifics. I want to highlight a few. First of all, this will cause massive litigation. Massive litigation. Because there's going to be many citizens, and I believe even lawmakers, that are going to have to defend themselves against this erroneous action. Number two, it criminalizes lawful behavior. Many of you are familiar with the text of this 18-page initiative, where if you loan a firearm, if you transfer a firearm, if you pass along a firearm to your children, you go to the range and so forth and so on, that behavior now becomes criminalized. Now you go, well, what penalty? The first offense is what? A Class C felony. What's the misdemeanor. What's the second offense? A Class C felony. You mean they would want to criminalize us? Bingo. Yes, exactly. Remember, criminalization is one step behind gun confiscation. And that's the agenda. That's the goal. Please, let's not lose sight of what the real goal and real agenda is. Here's another one. What does the term public safety background check mean? That is in the initiative, and yet even sheriffs and lawmakers cannot define the term. They have no idea what it means. Do you know who is going to define the term? The Department of Licensing. A bunch of unelected bureaucrats is going to sit in an office somewhere behind closed doors with no accountability, and they're going to determine what it means to have not just a background check, but a public safety background check. Fill in the blank. You know, many sheriffs and law enforcement are saying, how do we enforce this initiative uniformly if it passes? The answer is, it's not going to be it's not going to be enforced uniformly. It's going to be enforced selectively. And when you enforce selectively, the goal of selective enforcement, the goal of making examples of some, is to cast fear in the hearts of all. They don't need to come after all of us. They just need to criminalize some of us before many of us would decide, well, you know what, we'll go along. You can't go along because it's violating the very laws of nature and nature's God, the very rights that God has bestowed upon us. This is an unconstitutional initiative. It is an unconstitutional action. And it is an immoral action. If I-594 passes, it violates not only all of our founding principles, as I said, but it violates the very essence of those unalienable rights. If you don't care about your unalienable rights, then you're probably going to vote for it. But I encourage all of those who are listening, think about the cost of freedom, the cost of liberty. That if you value and cherish your liberty and your freedom, the moment you give it up, even to a certain degree, you're giving all of it up. You're laying down all of it. If we violate not only our founding principles, but if we violate the very laws of nature and nature's God, then folks, as a pastor, I believe we are without excuse. The things that will come, they will come. and we are now without excuse. Because when we could have stood up, when we could have fought, when we could have said no, when we could have thrown this initiative into the garbage, we didn't. And I pray that this state, that the people will make the right choice. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic. And we're not supposed to be at the whim We're not supposed to be at the whim of voters all the time where they get to decide whatever they want to do. We have a republic that is based upon foundational laws and foundational principles. So I want to conclude my time today, and again, I want to share with you what an honor it is to stand with all of you, to be here today, and to stand for, again, liberty, freedom, and the higher laws of God. Today, I want to declare from Seattle, Washington, that the battle against evil and tyranny continues, that we cannot stop fighting, that we cannot stop our efforts to stand against it. What is our choice? What choice must we make? Well, first of all, obviously, I would encourage you to vote no on Initiative 594. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, talk to anybody you can in these next few days that the ballots have already come out. Number two, stand with those sheriffs who are standing against Initiative 594. I thank those sheriffs who have come out and said no to this initiative publicly. And to those sheriffs who say, well, I support it or I'm against it privately, but I'm worried about coming out. I would say maybe it's time you reevaluate why you're a sheriff. Maybe it's time you reevaluate why you stood for public office. Because I always say if you can't publicly stand for your principles, you have no business being in public office. But thank those sheriffs who have stood and get behind them and call more so that the sheriffs are critical. We all know the critical role of the sheriffs. You know, I'm looking forward to the day when some sheriffs are going to issue arrest warrants, that when the federal agents or the president shows up in a county and they want to violate these foundational laws, that those sheriffs will start issuing some arrest warrants against those criminal behavior. I always have an encouragement for those who want to, participate in tyranny and come against our rights. Here's what I want to encourage them. Like Mr. Gates, Mr. Bloomberg, or anybody else who wants to vote for this stuff. I think it's time you just renounce your citizenship. I think it's time just lay down your citizenship, and I am willing to put together a going away party. Anybody up for that? We'll have a big going away party. We'll thank them and we'll send them off to another nation that loves to practice tyranny against its people. But not here in America, folks. Not here in Washington State. I want to ask you, remember this. The reason we are here in this place, the reason we are seeing these things happen, the real root of why these things are happening is because we have disobeyed our founding principles. We have violated our God of this nation. We have turned away from those things that made America the freest and greatest nation on the history of this planet. Today I want to ask you, let's obey our founding principles. Let's obey the laws of nature and nature's God. Let's turn back to our moral foundation. Let's turn back to our Judeo-Christian principles. And let's once again welcome God back into our hearts and into our nation. Until such time, tyranny will march on. Because without morality in God, there is no true liberty. I thank you for your time. I thank you for standing here today. Let's keep up the good fight. Vote no on I-594. And America bless God once again. Thank you so much.